Hey, what's up everybody? In this video we're going to be turning this old oak hutch from this to this. Here's a little demo step by step. We will be replacing all the knobs, hardware, painting it, sealing it, and also distressing it. Here is the original oak hutch. Pretty hideous. You can see we had replaced the knobs before. Also, this drawer is incredibly sticky, so we'll be addressing that issue as well. Look at the condition of the top. Very scratched, faded, dirty, pretty disgusting. So let's get started here. First thing we're going to do is wipe down the unit, get all of the dust and whatnot off, and we're going to be unscrewing the knobs and hardware. We'll pop those out and place those to the side. And we'll be doing our best to scrub off a little of the blemishes and whatnot with a light sandpapering. So I'm using 150 grit. Depending on your setup, you may or may not want to go more aggressive. Now, if you've never used a paint deglosser before, this virtually eliminates the need for sanding. The idea is that it preps the surface sand free. I'll put a link in the description below if you're interested in a paint deglosser. Highly recommended stuff. It saves a lot of manual labor. In other words, you don't have to sand all those crevices by hand. You can just simply wipe it down with a paint deglosser. So again, that's pretty cool stuff. Also, I'll be using a special paint to paint these things up, and they also minimize the need for prep. Of course, depending on how much stain and the severity, so to speak, of the surface, you might want to take an orbital sander and sand things down. Incidentally, you could sand down the hardware to give it more of a rustic look, but later we'll be painting those as well. But just to show you the possibilities here. So we're continuing to remove the hardware, also all the hinges and all the knobs, and we're going to give a light sanding. I'm going to be using a little bit of patch. We have some pretty severe gouges in the surface of this hutch. So I'm just going to sand out those corners just a little bit, remove some of those jagged edges, and I'll be getting some patch here, some wood patch, and just filling those in. I want the surface of the patch to be higher than the surface of the table so I can sand that down later. Next up, I'm going to be removing the inserts for the drawer, the sliding feature, and you can see there's a little chip there. I'll be taking that out, sanding that down, and now I'm going to be applying tape so I have a nice clean paint line when I go to apply my paint. Alright, so the patch is dry and it's ready to be sanded down. So I'll do that, ensuring a nice smooth surface. Next up, I'm going to take my paint. Now again, this paint is supposed to be prep free. It's pretty cool stuff. Depending on how much stain, as I mentioned, you have on your oak, you might want to do complete prep work, or at least some prep work. Now for the purposes of this video, part of my work will be prepped using a sander and deglosser, and the other part will not be prepped. I'm just going to apply the paint directly over this oak. I'll put a link in the description below for this specific paint. Again, it's pretty cool stuff. It generally works pretty well, but of course there is some bleeding that happens. Now on this door, I did no prep work on this particular swinging door, and you can see we've got a little bit of bleeding coming through. But check out that white here at the bottom. I put a layer of spray paint over it, and that seemed to be blocking the stain. It's been a couple of days since it's dried, so you could just kind of do this and put a little layer of spray paint over it if you do see bleeding. Now, I'm not worried about perfect uniform application because I'm going to be distressing this, so I actually want there to be a little bit of inconsistency. Now this side I did prep with sanding and a little bit of deglosser, and very minimal bleeding happening on this side. So I'm going to apply several layers of paint. In fact, I'm going to apply 2 to 3 layers of paint, again giving it a good stir each time and using a high quality brush. You don't want to skimp on the brushes here. It's my opinion that a cheap brush will leave lots of bristles and other things in your paint, and you don't want that. So All right, now I'm moving on to paint the surface of the hutch using a gray. Now it's going to go on a lot lighter than I want, but of course when I go to seal it up with a polyurethane, that's going to darken it up really beautifully. Here's where I'm at so far, just a nice overall picture. Got the sides painted all white, and I'm continuing to apply a second and third coat of gray paint to the hutch top. And I'll want to be mindful of any contours. I can take my light 220 grit sandpaper and knock down any dust particles that might settle or anything that I see. All right, next I'm going to spray paint my hinges, and I'm going to go with a stainless steel to help match those knobs and go well with the gray top of the hutch. All right, so I'm pretty happy with my white paint job. I'm going to remove the tape. You can see that nice clean paint line there. That turned out beautifully, I think. Notice I didn't paint the inside of the hutch to save paint and time. All right, next I'm going to be dealing with that stuck cabinet. So this little plastic piece was a little higher than it should have been, creating some friction. So I'm just going to lower that here. Obviously your hutch might have a different setup, but just to give you an idea on maybe how you could address that. Now I'm going to be reapplying all the knobs and putting the hardware back on. Here are the hinges. Notice I did not paint the underside of the hinges, the back sides of them, since they're not going to be visible, nor did I paint the back sides of the doors. Again, this saves paint, money, and time. All right, here's where I'm at so far. Now I will reinstall that drawer slide. Remember that wooden chip on that stuck drawer? That really tight drawer. So I just flipped that around and made the smooth side go up front. That should help with resisting any friction. All right, so again, I'm putting all the stops back on, all the hardware back on, and we are closing up really nicely, just like we did. Of course, the knobs to the drawers go back. And there's just something about a white and a stainless steel colored gray that goes really well together, I think. All right, and hang with me. We're going to be distressing it pretty soon. This will be our next step. You obviously have the option to distress it first and then put your hardware back on. I chose to put everything back together and then distress it so as I didn't distress any parts that were not visible. So I'm going to start with the edges. If you've not distressed before, I have a block of sandpaper. You can use 150, 220. You don't want something super aggressive. You want to have a little bit more control. So I recommend a 150, maybe a 220. You'll have to experiment there. Notice it takes several fast passes for it to kind of rub off. That allows me to have more control on how deep I want that distressed look to go. So here's a better view of it on the top. And I'm going to be doing all the corners. You obviously have the option to do the flat white panes to create distress there. But I think it looks really sharp if you distress and remove all those corner lines. So check out what I'm doing along all the panels, the corners of the panels of the doors, the cabinets, and the countertop as well. It doesn't have to be a perfect continuous line of undershowing oak, but I do want there to be enough where it looks like a line that's forming. All right, now I'm applying my polyurethane stain. I really like this stuff. It's high gloss and gives it an additional distressed look to it because it's darker and because it has little hints of brown and yellow in it. I think it looks really nice. And I'll do 2 or 3 coats of that and let it dry. And that's it. This is the final product. We went from this old oak hutch to a modern distressed look. Beautiful. Hopefully this video has been helpful for you. For more do-it-yourself projects and home product reviews, be sure to subscribe. Thanks.